The voice stopped Marilyn Monroe mid-conversation. She was at a party in Los Angeles in early 1955, talking to some producer about some script she wasn't interested in, when she heard it. That voice. Rich and warm and technically perfect, floating through the room from a record player someone had put on. "Who is that?" Marilyn asked, interrupting the producer mid-sentence. He looked annoyed at being interrupted, then listened. "Ella Fitzgerald," he said dismissively. "Great voice, but she's not really a nightclub act." Too. He didn't finish the sentence. But Marilyn understood what he wasn't saying. Too black, too heavy. Not glamorous enough for the white nightclub circuit that dominated Los Angeles entertainment in 1955. Marilyn excused herself from the conversation and walked toward the music. She stood there listening to Ella's voice wrap around the melody like honey, technically flawless but also deeply emotional, and she thought, "This is the greatest singer I've ever heard." And then she thought, "Why have I never seen her perform live?" That question would lead to a phone call, a promise, and one of the most important acts of quiet civil rights activism in 1950s Hollywood, a story that Ella Fitzgerald would remember and speak about with gratitude for the rest of her life. Marilyn Monroe in 1955 was at the absolute peak of her fame. She'd just filmed The 7-Year Itch with that iconic white dress scene. She was the biggest box office draw in Hollywood. Everyone wanted her at their parties, their premieres, their nightclubs. When Marilyn Monroe showed up somewhere, crowds followed. Photographers followed. Money followed. She was probably the most famous woman in America at that moment, and she knew it. But what makes this story special is what she chose to do with that power. Because most people who achieve that level of fame use it to get more money, more roles, more attention. Marilyn decided to use hers to help. Someone who deserved recognition but couldn't get it because of the color of her skin. Ella Fitzgerald in 1955 was already one of the greatest jazz vocalists in history. She'd been performing professionally since she was a teenager, had won awards, had recorded hit albums. Musicians respected her. Critics praised her. But she couldn't get booked at the major nightclubs in Los Angeles. The Mocambo, Cyros, the Coconut Grove, all the prestigious venues where careers were made and stars were seen, they didn't book black performers. Or if they did, it was rarely and reluctantly. The excuse was always the same. Their clientele wouldn't accept it. It wouldn't be good for business. Maybe someday, but not now. It was the polite racism of the entertainment industry, the kind that smiled and said, "You're very talented, but..." and then closed the door. And it meant that Ella Fitzgerald, despite being objectively one of the best singers alive, was locked out of the venues that could have taken her career to the next level. Marilyn started asking around about Ella after that party. She wanted to see her perform live. People told her where Ella was playing: smaller jazz clubs, venues in black neighborhoods, places that weren't on the main Hollywood circuit. Marilyn went to one of these shows, quietly, without publicity, just wanting to hear this incredible voice in person. She sat in the back of a small club and listened to Ella command the room with nothing but her voice. No elaborate costumes, no gimmicks, just pure technical mastery and emotional depth. Marilyn, who was constantly being told she succeeded because of her looks rather than her talent, recognized real artistry when she saw it. And she was furious that this woman, this obviously brilliant performer, couldn't get the same opportunities that Marilyn herself received constantly. After the show, Marilyn managed to meet Ella briefly. She told her how much she loved her voice, how she thought Ella was the greatest singer she'd ever heard. Ella was gracious but also a bit wary. Hollywood actresses didn't usually seek out jazz singers in small clubs, and praise from white performers often rang hollow when it came without any actual support. But Marilyn was sincere, and Ella could sense that. They talked for a few minutes, and as Marilyn was leaving, she asked, "Why don't you perform at places like the Mocambo?" Ella's smile was sad. "They don't book performers like me," she said. Marilyn understood immediately what "like me" meant, and she decided to do something about it. The Mocambo was the most prestigious nightclub in Los Angeles in 1955. Located on Sunset Strip, it was where Hollywood stars went to be seen, where record executives came to scout talent, where a successful engagement could make a career. The owner was Charlie Morrison, a businessman who understood that his club's success depended on attracting famous clientele. And nobody was more famous than Marilyn Monroe. So when Marilyn called him and said she wanted to talk about booking a performer, Morrison took the call immediately. What he wasn't expecting was what Marilyn was about to propose. "I want you to book Ella Fitzgerald," Marilyn said, getting straight to the point. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Morrison was trying to figure out how to say no politely. "Miss Monroe, I don't think she's quite right for our—" Marilyn interrupted him. "She's the greatest singer in America, and you know it. Book her for a week. I'll personally come every single night and sit in the front row. I'll make sure the press knows I'm there. You'll have photographers, journalists, everyone trying to get in to see why Marilyn Monroe is so interested in this singer. Your club will be packed, and you'll make money hand over fist." Morrison was silent, doing the math in his head. Marilyn Monroe, front row, every night for a week? The publicity alone would be worth a fortune. The ticket sales would be record-breaking. And if Ella Fitzgerald was really as good as Marilyn claimed, well, it wasn't really a risk at all. But wait until you hear what Marilyn demanded in return for her guaranteed appearances, because this is where her understanding of power and leverage becomes clear. Marilyn wasn't just asking Morrison to book Ella for 1 week. She wanted him to promise that if Ella did well, which Marilyn knew she would, he would book her regularly. She wanted Ella to have a real chance at the Mocambo, not just a token appearance that the club could point to whenever anyone accused them of discrimination. Morrison agreed. Partly because refusing Marilyn Monroe when she was offering to personally guarantee your success was business stupidity. But also, to his credit, because once Marilyn explained it, he could see the opportunity. A legendary jazz vocalist, the hottest movie star in Hollywood, and a venue that would get more press attention in 1 week than it usually got in a year? That was a win all around. Ella Fitzgerald got the call about the Mocambo booking and initially didn't believe it. Clubs like that didn't book her. They just didn't. But her manager confirmed it was real and explained that Marilyn Monroe had made it happen. Ella was moved but also nervous. This was a huge opportunity, but it also came with enormous pressure. She'd be performing for an almost entirely white audience who came expecting to see Marilyn Monroe and might resent having to listen to a black jazz singer first. She'd be under intense scrutiny, proving not just her own worth but whether integrated entertainment could work at all. And she'd be doing it with one of the most famous women in the world sitting in the front row watching her every move. Opening night at the Mocambo was exactly what Marilyn had promised Morrison: packed. Every table sold, photographers outside, press asking for quotes, and sitting front row center, exactly as promised, Marilyn Monroe in an elegant dress, blonde hair perfect, smile radiant. She was there for Ella, but she also knew her presence was making this night work. People had come to see Marilyn. Now they were going to discover Ella, and Marilyn was going to make sure they paid attention. When Ella walked on stage, there was polite applause, but also an atmosphere of skepticism. This crowd hadn't come for jazz. They'd come to see Marilyn Monroe and maybe spot other celebrities. Ella was an unexpected warm-up act, and some people were already looking restless. But then Ella opened her mouth and started to sing. And the room changed. You could feel the shift, the initial skepticism giving way to attention, attention giving way to appreciation, appreciation becoming genuine awe. Because Ella Fitzgerald on a good night was an unstoppable force. And this night, with everything riding on it, she gave one of the best performances of her career. Marilyn sat in the front row and listened with complete focus. She didn't check her makeup or chat with the people at her table or acknowledge the stares from other patrons. She listened to Ella like Ella was the only person in the room. And because Marilyn Monroe was giving Ella that level of attention, everyone else did too. That's how power works. The most famous person in the room decides what's important, and everyone else follows their cue. Marilyn had decided Ella was important, So the crowd agreed. By the third song, people weren't just being polite. They were genuinely moved. By the fifth song, they were applauding enthusiastically. By the end of the set, Ella got a standing ovation. Marilyn kept her promise. She came every single night that week, front row, every performance. Sometimes she brought friends, other actors, directors, people with influence. She made sure the press knew she was there and why. "I'm here to hear the greatest singer in America," she told reporters. Everyone should hear Ella Fitzgerald. The publicity was enormous. Every newspaper in Los Angeles covered it. The nightclub was packed every night, turning away people at the door. And Ella got the kind of exposure she'd been denied her entire career, performing for integrated audiences, being reviewed by major critics, proving that talent transcends any boundaries that bigotry tries to impose. The week at the Mocambo changed Ella Fitzgerald's career. Suddenly, the doors that had been closed started opening. Other major clubs wanted to book her. She started getting offers for television appearances. Her record sales increased. The risk that club owners had always claimed she represented turned out to be no risk at all. Audiences loved her. All it had taken was someone with enough power and courage to give her the platform she deserved. And that someone was Marilyn Monroe, who had seen an injustice and used her fame to correct it. But here's what makes this story even more remarkable. Marilyn didn't publicize her role. She didn't call press conferences to announce what a great thing she'd done. She didn't use Ella's success to promote her own image as a civil rights advocate. She just showed up, kept her promise, helped break down a barrier, and moved on. The story became public because Ella told it, over and over, in interviews for the rest of her life. "I owe Marilyn Monroe a real debt," Ella said in one interview years later. "She personally called the owner of the Mocambo and told him she wanted me booked there. She told him she'd come every night I sang, and she did. She sat right there in the front row every night. The owner wasn't used to that kind of attention. After that, I never had to play a small jazz club again. She was an unusual woman, a little ahead of her time. And she didn't know it." That last line, "and she didn't know it," is crucial to understanding Marilyn Monroe. She didn't think what she did was particularly revolutionary. She'd seen a talented person being denied opportunities because of racism. She had the power to change that, so she did. It seemed obvious to her. But in 1955 Hollywood, what she did was radical. This was a decade before the Civil Rights Act, at a time when segregation was legal in much of the country, when interracial friendships were rare and often socially costly for the white person involved. Marilyn risked absolutely nothing by making that phone call and showing up at those performances. Her fame was too secure to be threatened by supporting a black artist. But she also didn't have to do it. Most white performers with her level of power didn't. They'd praise black artists privately, acknowledge their talent, maybe even genuinely oppose segregation, but they wouldn't actually use their privilege to change anything. Marilyn did. The friendship between Marilyn and Ella continued after that week at the Mocambo. They'd see each other at parties sometimes, would chat when they crossed paths. It wasn't a deep daily friendship. They lived in different worlds and had different lives. But there was genuine respect and affection there. Ella appreciated what Marilyn had done, and Marilyn appreciated Ella's artistry. They were two women who'd made it in an industry that tried to limit them both. Ella because of her race, Marilyn because people thought she was just a pretty face. They recognized each other's struggle, even though the specifics were very different. When Marilyn Monroe died in 1962, Ella Fitzgerald was devastated. She told reporters, "I loved her. She was a wonderful woman. She did something for me that nobody else would do. And she did it because she thought it was right, not because she wanted credit for it. That's the kind of person she was." Ella continued to tell the story of what Marilyn did for her for decades, making sure people knew that Marilyn Monroe wasn't just a movie star. She was someone who used her power to help others, who saw injustice and acted to correct it, who was a little ahead of her time in understanding that talent and humanity matter more than skin color. The story of Marilyn and Ella at the Mocambo is one of those rare Hollywood stories that's actually straightforwardly good. There's no tragic twist, no dark undercurrent. No exploitation hidden beneath apparent kindness. It's just a story about someone with privilege using it correctly. Marilyn saw that the system was unfair, recognized she had the power to intervene, made a strategic decision about how to leverage her fame effectively, followed through on her promise, and helped change someone's life for the better. That's what real allyship looks like. Not performative statements or virtue signaling, but actual action that costs you nothing, but requires you to show up. What makes the story particularly powerful is understanding what it meant in the context of 1955. This was the same year that Emmett Till was murdered. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on that bus in December 1955. The Montgomery bus boycott was just beginning. The civil rights movement was gathering force, but legal segregation was still entrenched across America. In that context, what Marilyn did at the Mocambo, using her fame to integrate a major Los Angeles nightclub, proving that white audiences would accept and celebrate Black performers if given the chance, helping to normalize integrated entertainment, that mattered. It was a small action in the grand scheme of the civil rights struggle, but small actions by people with platforms can ripple outward and change norms. It's also worth noting what this story reveals about Marilyn's character that often gets lost in the narratives, about her troubled life and tragic death. She was capable of seeing beyond herself, of recognizing talent and injustice, of taking action without needing public credit. She understood power dynamics well enough to know exactly how to leverage her fame, and she cared enough about fairness and artistry to actually bother doing something. Those are not the qualities of the dumb blonde character she played on screen, or the fragile mess that some biographies have painted her as. Those are the qualities of a thoughtful, strategic, genuinely decent person who understood her privilege and chose to use it well. The Mocambo no longer exists. It closed in 1958, just 3 years after Ella's legendary engagement there. But the impact of what happened during that week in 1955 lasted much longer. Ella Fitzgerald went on to have one of the most successful careers in jazz history, performing at the finest venues in the world, being recognized as one of the greatest vocalists of the 20th century. She always credited Marilyn with opening doors that had been closed to her. And in every interview where she told the story, you could hear the genuine gratitude and affection in her voice. Marilyn had helped her when she didn't have to. That kind of kindness, especially across racial lines in 1955, meant everything. For Marilyn, the Mocambo week was just one incident in a complicated, often painful life. But it was a moment where everything aligned correctly. Her fame was at its peak, she had the power to make things happen, she saw an opportunity to do good, and she followed through. In a career full of exploitation and disappointment and studio battles and personal struggles, this was purely positive. She helped someone. She broke down a barrier. She made the entertainment industry slightly more fair. And she did it without needing to be the center of attention. Content to sit in the front row and let Ella shine. There's a photograph from one of those nights at the Mocambo. Marilyn sitting at her front row table, looking up at the stage with complete focus while Ella performs. Marilyn's face is lit up with genuine joy and appreciation. That photograph captures something essential about who Marilyn Monroe was at her best. Someone who could recognize greatness in others, who took pleasure in excellence, who understood that her fame gave her power and chose to use that power to help, rather than just to advance her own interests. That's the Marilyn Monroe who should be remembered alongside all the tragic stories and the scandals and the struggles. The Marilyn who made a phone call, made a promise, showed up every night, and helped change someone's life because it was the right thing to do. The ripple effects of what happened at the Mocambo that week extended far beyond Ella Fitzgerald's career, though that alone would have made it significant. Other club owners in Los Angeles saw that Morrison had packed houses and glowing press coverage, and they started reconsidering their own policies about booking Black performers. If the Mocambo could successfully present Ella Fitzgerald to white audiences, maybe they could too. The economic argument that integrated entertainment would drive away white customers was suddenly exposed as false. White audiences would come, would pay, would appreciate Black artistry if given the opportunity, and if the venue had enough confidence to present it properly. Marilyn had proved that, and in doing so, she'd made it easier for the next Black performer trying to break into mainstream venues. What's particularly striking about Marilyn's action is that she didn't just make a phone call and consider her work done. She showed up. Every single night. That physical presence mattered enormously. It sent a message that this wasn't just celebrity whim or performative allyship. Marilyn was genuinely invested in Ella's success. She was willing to spend her evenings night after night making sure this worked. That kind of sustained commitment is rare. It's easy to make grand gestures. It's harder to follow through consistently, especially when it requires your time and presence. Marilyn understood that her showing up was part of what made the whole thing work, so she showed up. That reliability, that keeping of promises, revealed character that went deeper than the flighty persona she often played on screen. There's also something important about the fact that Marilyn recognized Ella's genius immediately, without needing anyone to explain it to her. She heard that voice and knew she was hearing something extraordinary. That speaks to Marilyn's own artistic sensibility. She understood excellence when she encountered it. And it speaks to her lack of prejudice. She didn't hear a Black jazz singer and categorize Ella as other or not for me. She heard a brilliant vocalist and responded to the artistry. That sounds simple, but in 1955 America, it wasn't. Segregation trained white people to not see or appreciate Black excellence, to stay within racial boundaries, to not question why certain spaces were all white. Marilyn questioned it. And then she acted. The story also reveals something about the economics of discrimination. Charlie Morrison at the Mocambo wasn't necessarily a committed racist. He was a businessman who thought segregation was good for business. When Marilyn showed him it wasn't, when she demonstrated that integrated entertainment could be profitable, he changed course. That's both encouraging and depressing. Encouraging because it means some barriers fall when the economic incentives shift. Depressing because it means those barriers were never really about genuine belief or principle. They were about money and convenience. Ella Fitzgerald had always been talented enough to perform at the Mocambo. She just needed someone to prove to the owner that booking her wouldn't hurt his bottom line. That's a damning indictment of how discrimination works, not always from passionate hatred, but often from casual prejudice and economic cowardice. Marilyn's action at the Mocambo stands in stark contrast to how many other white celebrities of that era handled racial issues. Most would have expressed private support, maybe made donations to civil rights causes, perhaps given interviews saying they believed in equality. But very few used their actual fame as leverage to integrate spaces or advance Black careers. Marilyn didn't just talk about fairness, she picked up the phone and made it happen. That's the difference between sympathy and solidarity, between supporting a cause abstractly and taking concrete action that costs you something, even if what it costs is just your time and the potential social awkwardness of being associated with civil rights activism in 1955. It's worth noting that Marilyn herself faced discrimination in Hollywood, though obviously of a completely different nature than what Ella faced. Marilyn was constantly dismissed as unintelligent, wasn't taken seriously as an actress, was reduced to her physical appearance and sex appeal. She knew what it felt like to be judged by something other than your talent. Maybe that gave her extra empathy for Ella's situation. Maybe it made her more sensitive to injustice generally. Or maybe she was just a person with a strong sense of fairness who happened to have the power to act on it. Either way, the parallel struggles, though vastly different in their specifics and consequences, might have created a bond of understanding between these two women, who were both fighting to be recognized for their artistry in an industry that wanted to limit them. The photograph from the Mocambo, Marilyn watching Ella perform with that expression of pure joy, has become iconic in its own right, though it's nowhere near as famous as images of Marilyn in the white dress or the pink gown. But it should be more famous, because it captures a version of Marilyn Monroe that the public didn't always get to see. The thoughtful person who appreciated artistry, who took action against injustice, who was capable of focusing entirely on someone else's excellence without needing to be the center of attention. That photograph shows Marilyn at her best, And it shows what fame can be used for when the famous person has character to go along with their celebrity. Ella Fitzgerald died in 1996 at the age of 79, having lived a long and remarkably successful life. In one of her final interviews, she was asked if there was any one moment that changed the trajectory of her career. She didn't hesitate. Marilyn Monroe at the Mocambo. That's when everything changed. More than 40 years after those performances, that week still stood out as the turning point. Because before the Mocambo, Ella was respected but limited. After the Mocambo, she was respected and free to perform anywhere. Which city are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever used whatever privilege or power you have to help someone facing discrimination? How can we better support artists and people who face barriers? What does real allyship look like in action? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Boulevard of Monroe for more stories about Hollywood heroes who used their fame for good, the quiet acts of courage that changed lives, and the kindness that should never be forgotten. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next story.